Carla Porter. On March 1, 2010, Carla Louise Porter orchestrated a calculated plot that ended with her husband, William Raymond Porter's passing at their Hess gas station in Towson, Maryland. The Baltimore County resident had spent months planning what she would later claim was an act of desperate self-preservation. The case would become one of Maryland's most discussed due to complex questions about when alleged domestic situations might justify extreme responses and whether battered spouse syndrome should mitigate criminal responsibility for premeditated acts. Porter falsely told her husband that the gas station's alarm had been triggered, luring him to the location early that morning. She had hired Walter Bishop Jr. through her nephew, Seamus Coyle, to carry out the plan. Porter had obtained a handgun from her sister, Susan Dada, specifically for this purpose, showing the level of planning involved. When William Porter arrived at the gas station, Bishop forced both him and his wife into a back room and shot William twice in the head. Porter initially told police that an African-American man had robbed them, but this description didn't match Bishop's appearance. The inconsistency in her story raised immediate suspicions. While her story was suspicious, the primary break came when Walter Bishop Jr. was apprehended fleeing the scene and eventually confessed, detailing the $9,000 payment Porter had promised him. What drove Porter to such extreme measures? Porter claimed she had endured years of physical, verbal, and psychological mistreatment since their marriage in 1986. She testified to being harmed with tools, threatened with weapons, and subjected to demeaning acts. In her testimony, she stated, "I knew it was a matter of time before he killed me," expressing what she claimed was constant fear for her life. Mental health experts diagnosed Porter with battered spouse syndrome, PTSD, and depression. They argued these conditions distorted her perception of threats and led her to take preemptive action. The defense strategy centered on arguing she believed she had no other way to escape the situation alive. However, prosecutors painted a different picture. They noted that Porter had previously tried to hire someone in 2009, offering $10,000 to her daughter's boyfriend to harm her husband. This prior attempt suggested planning rather than a desperate last resort. The prosecution argued this was premeditated murder for personal gain, not self-defense. Porter's plan began unraveling when a business associate, Tony Fales, reported her earlier solicitation attempts to authorities. Investigators had Fales wear a wire, capturing Porter's attempts to keep him silent about what he knew. These recordings proved crucial to the prosecution's case. Phone records showed over 50 calls between Porter and her conspirators on the morning of the incident. This communication pattern demonstrated coordination among multiple people. The volume of calls suggested active management of the plot rather than passive involvement. Porter was arrested on March 6, 2010, just days after her husband's passing. Initially, she denied any involvement in the plot. However, when confronted with evidence, she confessed to hiring someone for a beat-up rather than ending her husband's life. This admission undermined her complete denial while still minimizing her intent and responsibility for the fatal outcome. The confession to hiring for assault rather than murder suggested she was attempting to mitigate her culpability while acknowledging some involvement. During a 6-day trial in Baltimore County Circuit Court, the jury rejected the battered spouse syndrome defense. They convicted Porter of first-degree murder, conspiracy, 3 solicitation counts, and handgun use. The verdict indicated the jury believed she had other options besides orchestrating her husband's demise. Appeals courts affirmed her convictions, determining that self-defense instructions were harmless because there was no evidence of imminent danger. The courts ruled that Porter couldn't claim self-defense when she had planned the incident days in advance and wasn't present during the actual shooting. On November 4, 2013, Porter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole plus 40 years. The lengthy sentence reflected the premeditated nature of the crime and the involvement of multiple conspirators. The victim's brother described Porter as a very manipulative person, very devious, suggesting the family didn't believe her claims of being a victim. Her co-conspirators also received significant sentences. Bishop received life plus 20 years for actually carrying out the shooting. Porter's family members who assisted received lesser sentences for their roles. The case demonstrated how murder-for-hire conspiracies result in consequences for everyone involved. Porter remains at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. As of late 2025, she has petitioned for a medical release review based on age-related health issues, though a decision is currently pending. From a case involving alleged domestic turmoil, the next would reveal financial motives. Raminder Kaur. In 2013, Raminder Kaur became part of a conspiracy to end the life of her husband's ex-wife, Preeta Gaba, in Prince George's County, Maryland. The case centered on disputes over alimony payments and financial obligations from her husband's previous marriage. Kaur's involvement in the plot would lead to one of Maryland's most complex legal cases, eventually reaching the U.S. Supreme Court. Kaur was married to Gulpreet Taneja, who had been divorced from Preeta Gaba and was ordered to pay significant alimony. The alimony payments strained the couple's finances and became a source of ongoing conflict. Kaur and Taneja allegedly saw ending Gaba's life as a solution to their financial problems. The conspiracy involved detailed planning. Taneja shot Gaba, and evidence suggested Kaur played a role in the planning and potentially in the execution of the plot. The shooting occurred under circumstances that indicated premeditation rather than a spontaneous act. Investigators built their case through multiple types of evidence. DNA evidence linked the conspirators to the crime, and investigators found notes related to the planning. These written materials provided crucial insight into how the couple had discussed, planned, and prepared for what they intended to do to eliminate their financial burden. The detailed notes demonstrated clear premeditation and planning rather than spontaneous action driven by emotion. Kaur maintained her innocence throughout the legal proceedings. She denied any involvement in planning or carrying out the shooting. Her defense strategy focused on arguing that prosecutors couldn't prove she had participated in the conspiracy beyond reasonable doubt. The case went to trial twice. The first trial resulted in a conviction, but legal issues emerged that required a retrial. The second trial also resulted in conviction on first-degree murder charges. The jury in both trials found the evidence of her involvement convincing despite her denials. A significant legal issue in Kaur's case involved witness testimony. One key witness had made prior inconsistent statements about what they had observed. The defense argued these inconsistencies should have prevented the witness's testimony from being used. However, courts determined the testimony was admissible despite the inconsistencies. The case eventually reached the U.S. Supreme Court on questions about witness testimony and constitutional rights. The court declined to hear the case in 2020, letting the Maryland Court of Appeals decision stand, which upheld her conviction based on the totality of evidence, including the incriminating notes. Despite the legal complexities, Kaur's conviction was ultimately upheld. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence reflected Maryland's serious approach to premeditated murder, particularly when motivated by financial gain. Gaba's family spoke about the loss of someone they loved and the pain of knowing she was taken from them over money. They emphasized that no financial dispute could justify taking a life. The family attended court proceedings to ensure Kaur and Taneja faced consequences. Taneja also received a life sentence for his role as the shooter. The prosecution successfully argued that both spouses participated in the conspiracy and should be held equally accountable under Maryland law. The case demonstrated how conspiracy laws allow all participants to be charged with murder even if only one person pulled the trigger. Kaur is currently serving her life sentence at Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. She continues to maintain her innocence despite multiple jury convictions and appellate court affirmations. Her case became a significant legal precedent on witness testimony issues that continues to be cited in criminal cases across the country. The Supreme Court's ruling clarified important constitutional questions about when prior inconsistent statements can be used in testimony. The financial motive in Kaur's case highlighted how disputes over money can escalate into tragedy when people believe violent solutions will resolve their problems. The alimony payments that seemed financially burdensome pale in comparison to the consequence of spending life in prison without any possibility of release. The couple's decision to pursue murder rather than exploring options to modify the alimony arrangement demonstrated catastrophically poor judgment. From financial disputes, the next case would reveal rage over a stolen phone. Bobby Barncord. In 2018, Bobby Barncord kidnapped and ended the life of Tiffany Jones in Baltimore over accusations involving a stolen phone. The case shocked the Baltimore community with its extreme brutality and the wildly disproportionate response to what started as a relatively minor dispute over personal property. The extreme level of harm inflicted seemed completely incomprehensible given the relatively minor alleged triggering incident. Barncord's actions involved multiple violent acts that demonstrated extreme rage. Jones was kidnapped and forced into a vehicle. The kidnapping marked the beginning of a series of events that would end tragically. Jones was taken against her will to a remote location where Barncord and others could carry out their violent plans without witnesses or possibility of intervention by authorities or bystanders who might have saved her life. What happened next involved fire. Barncord used an accelerant to set Jones on fire, causing severe burns. Use of fire as a weapon showed particular cruelty. Medical examiners would later document the extent of the burns Jones sustained. But the attack didn't end there. Jones was also stabbed, with knife wounds contributing to her passing. The combination of fire and stabbing indicated sustained attack rather than a single moment of rage. Jones suffered tremendously before succumbing to her injuries. The motive appeared to be rage over allegations that Jones had stolen Barncord's phone. This relatively minor accusation escalated into kidnapping, arson, and murder. The extreme disproportion between the alleged offense and the response shocked investigators and prosecutors. Barncord and her accomplices used a rental van. The connection to her father was through financial records used to secure the vehicle, rather than him owning it directly. Vehicle forensics and tracking helped establish the timeline and locations. DNA evidence from the knife used in the stabbing linked Barncord to the weapon. Forensic analysis also connected accelerant residue found at the scene to materials Barncord had access to. The physical evidence corroborated witness accounts of what occurred. During the investigation, Barncord confessed to driving Jones to the location and to setting the fire. Her confession provided crucial details about the sequence of events. However, she attempted to minimize her role by suggesting others were more responsible for the actual harm. The case went to trial with extensive evidence against Barncord. The prosecution presented the physical evidence, her confession, and testimony from witnesses who had knowledge of the plot. The jury found Barncord guilty on all counts, including kidnapping, arson, and murder. Barncord was sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years. The consecutive sentences reflected the multiple serious crimes she committed. The life sentence ensures she will never be released from custody. Jones's family spoke about the devastating loss of a mother and loved one. They described Jones as someone whose life was taken over something trivial. The family emphasized that no property dispute could justify what Barncord did to Jones. The The case highlighted how disputes over minor matters can escalate into tragedy when individuals have poor impulse control and access to weapons. A stolen phone accusation, even if true, didn't warrant kidnapping and murder. The extreme response showed a complete lack of proportionality and revealed someone capable of inflicting tremendous suffering over a minor grievance. The brutality of the attack suggested deep-seated rage that went far beyond the alleged triggering incident. Barncord is currently serving her sentence at Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. There have been no recent updates about appeals or other legal proceedings in her case since her conviction and sentencing. The overwhelming evidence and confession make successful appeals highly unlikely. The severity of her crimes and the strength of the evidence make successful appeals unlikely. From rage over a minor dispute, the next case would involve eliminating a romantic rival. Nicole Jackson. In 2003, Nicole Jackson pleaded guilty to murder-for-hire charges in Prince George's County, Maryland, involving a plot to end the life of her lover's wife. The case represented another disturbing instance where inappropriate romantic entanglement led to conspiracy and ultimately to someone's passing, highlighting how affairs can escalate into violence when boundaries are crossed. Jackson's guilty plea meant many details of the case were never fully aired in a public trial. Jackson had been involved in a relationship with a married man. The existence of his wife presented an obstacle to Jackson's vision of their future together. Rather than accepting that her relationship was with someone unavailable, Jackson allegedly plotted to remove the wife from the picture permanently. Court records from 2004 reveal that Jackson provided a photograph and the work schedule of the victim, Tracy Baker, to a hitman she believed she was hiring, who was actually an undercover police. Officer Jackson's guilty plea acknowledged her role in the conspiracy to hire someone to carry out the shooting. By pleading guilty, she avoided a potentially lengthy trial that would have revealed more details about the planning, execution, and her specific role in the conspiracy to end another woman's life. Murder-for-hire cases typically involve significant evidence of conspiracy. Phone records, financial transactions, and witness testimony usually combine to show the planning process. In Jackson's case, prosecutors apparently had sufficient evidence to secure her guilty plea without needing to proceed to trial. The motive was clear: eliminating a romantic rival. Jackson apparently believed that with the wife gone, she could have an unobstructed relationship with her lover. This reasoning showed a fundamental failure to consider the consequences of her actions or the value of human life. The victim's family suffered the loss of someone they loved because of Jackson's jealousy and inability to accept that her relationship was inappropriate. The family would have attended legal proceedings seeking justice for their loved one. Jackson's guilty plea likely came with a negotiated sentence in exchange for avoiding trial. Prosecutors noted she faced significant prison time for the murder-for-hire conviction. The exact length of her sentence wasn't widely reported, but murder-for-hire convictions in Maryland typically carry lengthy terms. The case joined other Maryland cases where individuals sought to eliminate romantic rivals or obstacles to relationships they desired. The pattern highlighted how jealousy and possessiveness can escalate into conspiracy to commit the ultimate harm when people lack ethical boundaries and fail to consider the sanctity of human life. Murder-for-hire schemes represent the most extreme and dangerous manifestation of romantic obsession and jealousy. Investigations concluded that the husband was unaware of the plot and no charges filed against him. Nicole Jackson was sentenced to 20 years and was paroled in early 2023. The plea agreement spared the victim's family the trauma of a lengthy trial where they would have had to hear details about how their loved one was targeted and harmed. However, it also meant the public record of the case remained sparse, with many questions unanswered. Jackson is believed to be serving her sentence in Maryland's correctional system, though recent updates about her whereabouts or status are not publicly available. The limited information reflects that the case was resolved through plea rather than trial, resulting in less media coverage and fewer court documents. The case served as another reminder of how romantic obsession can lead to criminal conspiracy. When people become fixated on relationships they can't legitimately have, some choose violence rather than accepting reality. Jackson's choices destroyed multiple lives: the victims' families, and her own. Her case highlighted the critical importance of accepting that not all desired relationships are appropriate or possible, particularly when pursuing them requires harming others. Emotional maturity requires recognizing boundaries and accepting disappointment rather than pursuing destructive solutions. When one person is married to someone else, pursuing that relationship requires respecting boundaries or accepting that the relationship cannot proceed. Jackson chose violence instead, with devastating consequences. From romantic rivalry, the next case would reveal jealousy within an established relationship. Katrina Benn. In 2012, Katrina Benn shot her lover, Eric Somua, in Prince George's County, Maryland, in what prosecutors described as an execution-style incident driven by jealousy. The case demonstrated how jealousy within romantic relationships can escalate into lethal consequences when one partner cannot accept perceived betrayal or rejection. Benn, who had worked as a nurse in Mississippi before the incident, had been in a relationship with Somua. The relationship was marked by intense jealousy on Benn's part, with extensive evidence suggesting she struggled with constant suspicions about Somua's faithfulness and became increasingly controlling. Friends described her jealous behavior as escalating dramatically over time, becoming increasingly concerning to those around them. These jealous feelings would ultimately drive her to take irreversible action. On the day of the incident, Benn shot Somua multiple times. The manner of the shooting indicated this wasn't a heat-of-the-moment act, but rather deliberate execution. The number of shots fired and their deliberate placement suggested clear intent to ensure the victim didn't survive the attack. The execution-style nature of the shooting indicated this was not a crime of passion. Investigators responded to the scene and began piecing together what had occurred. The crucial link was a Glock 26 handgun found in a lake near Benn's home. Ballistics matched the weapon to shell casings found at the scene, and cell tower data placed Benn's phone near the lake shortly after the murder. Forensic analysis of the bullets and casings found at the scene provided crucial physical evidence connecting Benn to the crime. The investigation revealed the relationship dynamics between Benn and Somua. Friends and acquaintances testified in detail about Benn's increasingly jealous behavior and her constant suspicions about Somua's activities and whereabouts. Multiple witnesses described her as becoming progressively more controlling and possessive as the relationship continued. This testimony helped establish motive for prosecutors building their case. Benn was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The evidence against her was substantial, including the forensic match of the weapon, witness testimony about their troubled relationship, and other physical evidence from the scene. Prosecutors argued she had planned to end Somua's life rather than accept the possibility of losing him to another woman. At trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a relationship dominated by Benn's jealousy and possessiveness. They argued that when she believed Somua was being unfaithful or was going to leave her, she decided that if she couldn't have him, no one would. This logic drove her to commit murder. The defense had limited options given the strength of the evidence. Benn's connection to the weapon and the circumstances of the shooting made arguing innocence difficult. The trial focused largely on whether the killing was premeditated or occurred in the heat of passion. The jury convicted Benn of first-degree murder, finding that she had intentionally and with premeditation ended Samua's life. The verdict reflected their conclusion that this was a planned execution rather than a spontaneous act during an argument. On the day of sentencing, prosecutors noted that Ben offered an indirect apology for her actions. However, the apology came only after conviction and couldn't undo the harm she had caused. Samua's family spoke about their loss and the pain of knowing he was taken from them by someone he had trusted. The judge sentenced Ben to life in prison without the possibility of parole plus 20 years. The sentence ensured she would never be released from custody. The additional 20 years reflected Maryland's enhancement penalties for use of a firearm in committing murder, demonstrating the state's tough stance on gun crimes. The consecutive nature of the sentences ensured maximum incarceration time. Samua's family emphasized that he didn't deserve to lose his life because of someone's jealous rage. They described him as someone who had been trying to navigate a difficult relationship and who paid the ultimate price for being involved with someone incapable of controlling their jealousy. Ben is currently serving her sentence at Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. There have been no recent news updates about appeals or other legal proceedings in her case. The strength of the evidence and the severity of her crime make successful appeals unlikely. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. Ben's inability to accept that her relationship might end led her to commit murder, ensuring that not only did the relationship end, but she would spend the rest of her life in prison. From jealousy between partners, the next case would reveal financial disputes between family members. Candace Craig. In 2023, Candace Craig ended her mother Margaret Craig's life in Prince George's County, Maryland, in a case that shocked the community with its brutality and the family betrayal it represented. The case involved financial fraud, deception, and a gruesome attempt to conceal what had occurred. Craig's actions toward her own mother demonstrated how disputes over money can escalate into unthinkable tragedy. The relationship between Candace and her mother had been strained by financial issues, specifically allegations that Candace had been stealing from Margaret's pension and Social Security income. Margaret had reportedly discovered the financial fraud and confronted her daughter about the missing money from her accounts. Craig shot her mother, ending her life during or after the financial confrontation. The shooting occurred inside their shared residence, where Craig had access to her mother's finances and daily life. What happened after the shooting shocked investigators and the community. Craig used a chainsaw to dismember her mother's body, attempting to dispose of the remains in a way that would prevent identification or discovery. The use of a chainsaw indicated significant planning about concealment after the fact and demonstrated a willingness to go to extreme lengths to avoid detection by authorities. But Craig went even further in her attempts to hide what she had done. She burned parts of her mother's remains on a grill, attempting to destroy evidence through fire. The smell of burning flesh would eventually alert neighbors that something was terribly wrong. This method of disposal demonstrated desperation to eliminate all traces of her mother. Neighbors noticed the unusual smell and contacted authorities. When investigators arrived and began questioning Craig, inconsistencies in her story raised immediate suspicions. She initially claimed her mother had left or was staying elsewhere, but evidence at the scene contradicted her accounts. Investigators searched the property. They discovered the horrific truth. The chainsaw used in the dismemberment was found, along with other evidence of what had occurred. Forensic evidence linked Craig directly to both the shooting and the subsequent dismemberment. The physical evidence recovered from the scene and property was overwhelming and left little doubt about what had occurred. Investigators determined that Candace had spent her mother's money on lavish personal expenses, and the confrontation occurred after Margaret threatened to report the unauthorized use of her credit cards to the police. Bank records showed systematic withdrawals and transfers from Margaret's accounts that benefited Candace. The financial fraud had been ongoing, with Craig exploiting her position as someone her mother trusted with access to her finances. Craig was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, along with additional charges related to the dismemberment and concealment. The case proceeded to trial with extensive forensic evidence and financial records. During the trial, Craig's own daughter testified against her, providing crucial testimony about what she knew of the events and the family dynamics. The testimony from Craig's daughter was particularly damaging, as it came from someone who had witnessed the relationship between Craig and Margaret firsthand. Her willingness to testify showed the family's desire for justice, despite the pain of testifying against her own mother. The jury convicted Craig of first-degree murder and related charges. The verdict reflected their conclusion that Craig had intentionally ended her mother's life, likely to prevent exposure of the financial fraud and avoid having to repay the stolen money. The dismemberment and attempted disposal showed consciousness of guilt. Following her conviction in May 2024, Candace Craig was sentenced in September 2024 to life in prison, plus an additional 18 years for the first-degree murder and dismemberment of her mother, Margaret Craig. The sentence ensured she would never be released from custody. The judge emphasized the betrayal of trust between mother and daughter, the financial exploitation, and the gruesome nature of the concealment attempts. Margaret Craig's family spoke about the loss of someone they loved and the horror of how she had been treated by her own daughter. They emphasized that Margaret had worked hard throughout her life and deserved to enjoy her retirement in peace, not be exploited and murdered by someone she had raised and trusted. Craig is currently serving her sentence at Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. The recent nature of her conviction means appeals are likely forthcoming, though the strength of the evidence makes successful appeals challenging. From financial disputes within a family, the next case would reveal a workplace incident with shocking brutality. Brittany Norwood. On March 11, 2011, Brittany Norwood committed one of Maryland's most brutal workplace incidents when she attacked her coworker Jana Murray inside a Lululemon store in Bethesda. Norwood's subsequent attempt to stage the scene as a robbery made the case even more disturbing. Norwood and Murray both worked at the upscale athletic apparel store. On the night of the incident, the two were alone in the store after closing. What transpired between them escalated into an attack that investigators would describe as one of the most brutal they had encountered. The medical examiner's report confirmed that Jana Murray sustained at least 322 distinct injuries, though common reports cite 331 from at least 5 different weapons, including a hammer and a wrench found inside the store. Medical examiners meticulously documented wounds from blunt objects, sharp implements, and other means found within the store that were used as weapons during the prolonged attack. The attack continued well beyond what was necessary to incapacitate Murray. What could have motivated such extreme brutality? The true motive remains somewhat unclear, though the prosecution suggested it began with a workplace dispute. Whatever the initial trigger, the response was catastrophically disproportionate. After ending Murray's life, Norwood attempted to stage the scene to appear as though both women had been attacked during a robbery. She inflicted minor injuries on herself, moved merchandise around to suggest a robbery, and tied herself up. She planned to tell investigators that masked intruders had attacked both of them. When police arrived the next morning after the alarm company couldn't reach the store, they found what initially appeared to be a robbery gone wrong. Norwood gave detailed accounts of 2 masked men who had allegedly attacked both her and Murray. Her story included descriptions of the attack and claimed she had been assaulted as well. However, investigators quickly found inconsistencies in Norwood's account. The forensic evidence at the scene didn't support her story of two masked intruders. The pattern of blood, the lack of forced entry, and the nature of Norwood's injuries compared to Murray's suggested a very different scenario. Investigators noticed that Norwood's injuries were superficial compared to Murray's catastrophic wounds. This disparity raised immediate questions. If both women had been attacked by the same assailants, why would one be killed brutally while the other suffered only minor injuries? The most damning evidence was the discovery of bloody footprints in a size 14 men's shoe, specifically a Reebok, that investigators proved were made by Norwood wearing shoes from the store's inventory to frame masked men. This physical evidence directly contradicted her story of two attackers. The footprints created a timeline that excluded the possibility of her claimed scenario. Confronted with the mounting evidence, Norwood eventually admitted inconsistencies in her story, though she never provided a complete or satisfying explanation for why the attack occurred or escalated to such brutality. Her changing accounts and inability to maintain a consistent story completely undermined her credibility with investigators and prosecutors building the case against her. Norwood was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial included extensive forensic testimony about the crime scene, the wounds, the footprint evidence, and the staging attempts. The prosecution painted a picture of calculated concealment following an inexplicably brutal attack. The jury convicted Norwood of first-degree murder in November 2011, just months after the incident. The verdict came relatively quickly, given the clear forensic evidence and the impossibility of her staged robbery story. The conviction meant Norwood faced a mandatory life sentence. Norwood was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge noted the extreme brutality of the attack and the calculated attempt to stage the crime scene and blame innocent people for what Norwood herself had done. The sentence ensured she would never be released. Murray's family provided devastating victim impact statements about losing Jana. They described her as talented, ambitious, and kind. Her passing at such a young age and in such a brutal manner left a permanent void. The family emphasized that Murray had simply been at work, doing her job, when she encountered someone capable of inexplicable brutality. Norwood has filed appeals claiming she deserves a new trial, arguing various legal points about her defense and trial proceedings. However, appeals courts have consistently denied her requests, finding no reversible errors that would warrant overturning her conviction. The evidence against her remains overwhelming. She is currently serving her life sentence at Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. The Lululemon murder, as it became known, remains one of the most discussed Maryland cases due to the extreme brutality and the workplace setting. From workplace violence, the next case would reveal thrill-seeking leading to unthinkable acts. Erica Sifrit. In 2002, Erica Sifrit and her husband Benjamin killed Joshua Ford and Martha Crutchley in Ocean City, Maryland, in what investigators described as a thrill kill. The case shocked Maryland's beach community with its senseless brutality and the couple's apparent enjoyment of what they had done. The subsequent dismemberment and disposal of the bodies added to the horror. Erica, born February 3, 1978 in Pennsylvania, had been an honors student and basketball player in college. She and Benjamin, a former Navy SEAL with military training, owned a scrapbook store together and appeared to observers to be a normal young couple living in Ocean City. On Memorial Day weekend 2002, the Sifrits met Ford and Crutchley, a couple on vacation. The couples spent time together socializing during the holiday weekend, with Ford and Crutchley having no reason whatsoever to suspect any danger from their new acquaintances. They were simply enjoying a beach vacation when they encountered the Sifrits. What happened next demonstrated the capacity for sudden, inexplicable violence. The Sifrits shot and stabbed both Ford and Crutchley in their condominium. The attacks occurred without apparent strong motive beyond what investigators characterized as thrill-seeking. The brutality didn't end with the killings. The Sifrits dismembered both bodies using various implements. The dismemberment showed a level of detachment that disturbed even experienced investigators. The couple then disposed of the remains in dumpsters and other locations, attempting to ensure they would never be found. Erica's gun was used in the shootings, directly linking her to the killings. Ballistic evidence would prove crucial in connecting the Sifrits to what had happened to Ford and Crutchley. The case began unraveling when the Sifrits were arrested on May 31, 2002, for an unrelated burglary. During the investigation of that crime, evidence emerged linking them to Ford and Crutchley's disappearance. Items belonging to the missing couple were found in the Sifrits' possession. After her arrest, Erica confessed to what had occurred, but attempted to blame Benjamin for the actual killings. She portrayed herself as a victim of her husband's influence, claiming he had an abusive hold over her. However, evidence suggested she had been an active and willing participant. Investigators discovered disturbing details about the couple's psychology. They had apparently discussed killing someone for the thrill of it. The murders of Ford and Crutchley appeared to be the fulfillment of these violent fantasies, rather than crimes committed in passion or for material gain. The trial in 2003 included testimony about the couple's relationship, the events of that Memorial Day weekend, and the evidence of what they had done to Ford and Crutchley. The jury convicted Erica of first-degree murder and related charges. Benjamin was tried separately and also convicted. Erica was sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years. The additional years reflected the severity of the crimes and the multiple charges she faced. The sentence ensured she would serve decades before any possibility of parole consideration, if Maryland law even allowed for eventual parole. Ford and Crutchley's families spoke about the senseless loss of two young people who had been on vacation enjoying life. The families emphasized that their loved ones had been killed for no reason other than the Sifrits' twisted desire to experience killing. The randomness of the victims made the tragedy even more painful. Erica later appealed her conviction, arguing ineffective counsel, but courts denied her appeal in 2014. The evidence against her was far too strong, and her participation too clear for procedural issues to warrant overturning the conviction. Erica and Benjamin divorced in 2010 while both were serving their sentences. The dissolution of their marriage occurred years into their incarceration, officially ending a relationship that had led to two senseless deaths. Benjamin Sifrit was granted parole and released in 2022 after serving 20 years of his 38-year sentence, while Erica Sifrit was denied parole in 2024 and remains incarcerated at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. From thrill-seeking violence, the final case would reveal harm within an adoptive family. Renee Bowman. Renee Bowman was convicted of taking the lives of two of her adopted daughters and storing their bodies in a freezer while continuing to collect financial subsidies for their care. The case in Maryland involved systematic exploitation of the adoption and foster care system, harm to vulnerable children, and financial fraud. Bowman's actions represented a complete betrayal of the parental role. Due to the involvement of minor victims, specific details about what occurred to the children cannot be provided. Bowman had adopted 3 special needs girls from Washington, D.C., taking on responsibility for their care. These children, who had already faced challenges in life, were placed with someone who would ultimately harm rather than help them. The official cause of death for the 2 girls, Minette and Tyrone, was listed as homicide by undetermined means, as the advanced decomposition caused by the cycle of freezing and thawing made a definitive asphyxiation finding difficult. The method used indicated deliberate intentional acts rather than tragic accidents or natural causes that might occur with special needs children. What made the case particularly disturbing was what Bowman did after the children's passings. She stored their bodies in a freezer rather than reporting their deaths. This concealment allowed her to continue collecting the monthly subsidies provided for the children's care, despite them no longer being alive. The financial motive became apparent through this pattern. While she collected substantial sums over the years, Renee Bowman was found to have fraudulently collected approximately $38,000 in adoption subsidies, specifically in the months and years after the children had died and their bodies were placed in the freezer. She had moved the freezer containing the remains twice to different locations, showing continued concealment efforts. The case came to light through Bowman's surviving daughter. The third adopted daughter, who was 9 at the time, escaped and told authorities about the harmful treatment she had endured. Her testimony proved crucial in building the case against Bowman. Her bravery in coming forward ensured her sister's deaths would not go unaddressed. The surviving daughter testified about being harmed and choked, providing evidence of the pattern of harmful treatment in the household. Her testimony helped establish that the deaths of her sisters were not isolated incidents, but part of ongoing harmful behavior. Bowman was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder, along with charges related to the financial fraud and the harm to the surviving daughter. The evidence included the bodies, the financial records, and the testimony of the surviving child. Bowman pleaded guilty to charges related to harming the surviving daughter. During proceedings, Bowman stated, "It haunts me every day," expressing what she claimed was remorse for her actions. Whether this remorse was genuine or an attempt to influence, sentencing remained questionable given the calculated nature of concealing the bodies and continuing to collect payments. In 2010, Bowman was convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms plus 75 years. The sentences reflected the 2 murders, the financial fraud, and the harm to the surviving child. The consecutive life terms ensured she would never be released from custody. The case prompted investigations into how the adoption system had failed to protect these vulnerable children. Questions arose about whether proper oversight had been in place and whether warning signs had been missed. The tragedy highlighted the need for better monitoring of adoptive and foster placements. The children's biological families and the community mourned the loss of 2 young lives that should have been protected by the person responsible for their care. The betrayal of the parental role made the case particularly painful for those who work in child welfare. Bowman is currently serving her sentence at Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. There have been no recent updates about appeals or other legal proceedings in her case. The severity of her crimes and the strength of the evidence make successful appeals unlikely. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.